From Dr. Seuss to Mr. Potato Head, iconic books and symbols are being re-examined and in many cases being canceled. Some say it's well past time to rid our culture of these racist symbols of hate. Others say it's the PC culture on steroids. Here for the debate are conservative commentator, investment advisor, and author James Coleman and Shayla Lawson, an award-winning author and activist. And later in the show, we are talking to award-winning children's book author, Cozbi Cabrera, and the director of the National Librarian Association to get their take on whether Dr. Seuss was a racist. All coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report.
The phenomenon of promoting and canceling of people, brands, and even shows, some considered to be offensive or problematic remarks or ideologies, this isn't a new concept. But with 24-hour news cycles and the proliferation of social media sites, it has gained new traction. In a Hill.com survey, 46% of Americans say cancel culture has gone too far. But the roots of cancel culture have been present throughout history, with societies punishing people for behaving outside of perceived social norms. According to sociologists, the process is designed to reinforce those norms. But who gets to decide those norms and what the ultimate price should be for violating the norms? That's all up for debate. And we're here for it at the Special Report. So welcome back, two of my favorite guests, authors James Coleman. He's the author of Cut the Crap, Close the Gap. You saw him on the show last Friday. And Shayla Lawson. You've also seen her on the show. She is the author of This Is Major, Notes on Diana Ross, Dark Girls, and Being Dope. Good morning, Jim and Shayla.
Good morning, Areva. It's good to see you again.
Okay, right off the bat, I'll ask you, Shayla, has cancel culture gone too far?
I would have to say no. And the reason why is because what are we referring to when we talk about cancel culture? When we look at history, just as you mentioned, we have evidence of boycotts and bans. We've seen, if we're looking at in the scope of children's literature, we've seen in the past where books like The Diary of Anne Frank or Are You There, God It's Me, Margaret have been considered inappropriate literature for children. And if we're looking at the context of the time that we're in now, I think sometimes the idea of what cancel culture is gets sensationalized. For instance, in the case of Dr. Seuss, it was the estate itself that decided that some of their materials were no longer fit for a broad spectrum of children because we are now in a multicultural world. And so that, to me, sounds more like what my parents would have called good manners, as opposed to the idea of cancellation. We are asked to be sensitive about different things. Our morality is shifting, and we're moving into a world that has to focus on ethics that cater to a broader number of people. And that's going to involve a lot of shifts in how we talk about culture and who is involved.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about Dr. Seuss this morning, but I want to ask you, Jim, do you think cancel culture has just gone too far?
I think it has gone too far, and I'm not by myself. 49% of the American people, according to the Cato Institute, believe that this whole idea behind canceling out our culture is just wrong. And even President Obama, as well as Noam Chomsky, he is a socialist, radical as he can be. He even said enough is enough. President Obama spoke to a group of young activists, and he told them, he said, being an activist is not canceling culture. You've got to be more understanding of others. You can't be so judgmental. And this is President Obama. And when he said that, he's at risk. We're all right now at risk of being canceled.
Well, we're going to talk
things we're saying today, we could be canceled.
Well, we're going to talk a lot about different presidents and what they've had to say. And of course, the former president, 45, making headlines this morning on cancel culture. But before we get to that, I want to ask you about Gina Carano. So Gina played Cara Dune and the Disney Star Wars spinoff of Mandalorian. She's been fired after comparing the plight of conservatives in Hollywood to that of Jewish people living in the 1930s Nazi Germany. She said she didn't even learn herself that she was being terminated until she saw it on social media. What do you think about Gina?
You know,
Should she have been fired?
You know what? I don't think so. The biggest thing that separates us from other countries is our right to free speech. This whole idea behind the cancel culture, the biggest thing they want to do is to cancel the First Amendment, our right to free speech. And so we've got to protect that right. It's very easy for us as Americans to take it for granted of our unique ability here in our country to be able to say what we believe and to be able to speak about it. And so I think it's wrong.
All right. You're right. Then we do have the First Amendment. But go ahead, Shayla, jump in.
We also have to understand that freedom of speech for us is never extended into our occupations. We have always had to be very careful about the language that we use when it comes to our professional sphere. And what's happened, especially when we look at the case of entertainers, but more broadly, just the way that the world is operating now, all of us are expected to function on social media in a way that layers what is professional and personal. And because of that, it's another place in which we now have to be accountable for how clauses that we have in our existing contracts. Because if we think in the past, if we think about people like Rihanna or Britney Spears, who've been removed from huge contracts because there was some way that something that was going on in their personal lives didn't reflect what was supposed to be the morality of Pepsi or L'Oreal, whatever company it was that they were supposed to represent. Gina Carano was representing Disney. And when she took to her personal stage, which also is professional because of the fact that she has this outlet as a celebrity, it put her in a very unique position that not every single American is in. And so it sensationalizes it to say that what happened to her is happening to all of us because Gina Carano signed a contract in which she was also representing Disney anytime that she decided to approach her social media. And in that, it might have been wrong for her to be fired in a way where she learned of it on social media, but recognizing that responsibility to the people that she talks to, because it wasn't just that one single tweet. There were also tweets that she made about the usage of masks to prevent COVID-19. There were tweets that were calling out voter fraud in the 2020 election, things that have both been pretty widely debunked, which could have serious repercussions for Disney as a brand. So we also have to think about, when we look at the idea of cancel culture, like what is our responsibility to the brands that we are now representing?
Yeah, I'm glad you bring that up, Shayla, because that's, I think, being missing, particular in this story about Gina, because there is something called a contract. And not everyone has the privilege to work for Disney. And if you have the privilege and opportunity to get a big contract with a big brand like Disney, then you're signing up to live by and abide by the policies and standards that they set. And if they say, based on our morality clause, we don't want people associated with our brand who are making comments that are offensive to Jewish people or Black people or gay people or whatever population, then either you agree to it and take the money or you don't agree to it. So to somehow claim that cancel culture is responsible for your own personal actions, which, she had a choice, is like crying wolf in a lot of ways. And then you go to Disney, you say, my goodness, Disney, did you do any kind of social media audit on Gina? Gina didn't just start talking negatively about Jewish people. She's been doing that, pretty consistently, using her social media platform, promoting these false claims, like you said, about voter fraud when there is no evidence of voter fraud. So you have to think about the executive that made the decision to bring her on and whether that, did that executive know that? Did Disney know that and thought they could somehow get away with it? So I think we have to ask both on Gina's, you have to challenge Gina for trying to, suggest that she's been wronged in some way because she has not been. But Disney too, I'm scratching my head saying, are we really to believe Disney? This one post got you all upset when there have been many, many posts very similar to this? I don't know.
I think this whole cancel culture crowd, it's very selective. Oftentimes, it's promoted by the radical left. Hold on, you had a chance to talk.
I'm going to give you a chance, but when you say words like the radical left, I get upset.
Because it's very selective. I'll give you examples. You've got a president right now, President Biden, who's adored by the cancel culture. 50 years ago, when he was a senator, he was the main one that sent over 11 million Black people to prison with his 3 strikes and you're out. Bill Clinton did the same thing, but nobody even talks about that. But if you say something that's against the radical left, you're going to get torn apart through social media and you're going to get destroyed. So it's very selective. And that's what I mean that's most dangerous about this whole idea. Even President Obama believes that it's gone too far. And what's really changed is the whole idea of being able to use social media. Years ago, before we had social media, it could be really kind of closed. But now today, anybody can cancel and anybody can be canceled.
Well, let's be clear, Jim. What you just stated is categorically false. This is not the quote unquote radical left. I don't even know where that phrase came from, but canceling people. Let's talk about Colin Kaepernick. Let's talk about Liz Cheney. Let's talk about Jim Jordan. Let's talk about the CPAC conference, which we're going to get to. This is not just about Republicans versus Democrats. This is everyone who has, made a decision that something is said, something is done that they don't like. They have an opportunity to go to social media and voice those opinions. It's not just liberals, as you'd like to call. And Joe Biden did not send 11 million African Americans.
That was the result of three strikes and route. That is true.
Categorically false, Jim, and that's a whole different category.
Not. I think you need to do your research on that.
It would take hours to help people understand Joe Biden's role, and it wasn't Joe Biden singularly. Joe Biden. It was all.
He was the sponsor, along with other segregationists. But that's forgotten.
I let you talk, Jim. It wasn't just Joe Biden. It was African Americans. It was African American church leaders and African American elected officials who were also in favor of some of those punitive laws. Joe Biden has since apologized for it. Many of those African American leaders have since apologized for that policy, which I would agree with you was wrongheaded in the first place. But we're not going to just put that label on Joe Biden.
It was wrongheaded, but he shouldn't be penalized today for something he did 30 years ago.
You're making a false statement about liberals.
I'm just saying he shouldn't be penalized about something he did 30 years ago because time changes. Our country is going through every 5 years and probably even less years now with social media. Our country is going to change its opinions across a wide range of topics. And you can't just cancel out people for something that they've said 30 years ago or 10 years ago. It's going to get to where you can't cancel people after 5 years because we're so much change is going on in our society. And I just think we need to all kind of cool it down and kind of embrace the freedoms that we have and to really try our best to be apologetic and understanding of each other.
I'll let you jump in. Final point on Gina, Shayla, and then we're going to move on to Mr. Potato Head. But I already know you disagree with Jim that we do have to hold people accountable. And
one of the things that we're not paying attention to when it comes to cancel culture is that we are using this term to pervasively suggest that everybody is spending the same amount of time educating themselves as to what is an opinion that somebody holds. And we're not talking about things that are happening of the moment. There are a lot of young people that you see on Twitter, on social media, who are like, this person or that person's canceled because they're saying something that they don't agree with in the moment. That is a false notion of what cancel culture is supposed to be about. If we look at going back into the Me Too movement and its usage of the idea of muting people, it's about reallocating resources so that we don't continue to give people who are hurtful, tyrannical, who are abusive a platform. It's not about going
think about Bill Clinton on that. Bill Clinton, who's destroyed
a lot of women. Sorry, Jim, we got to move on.
A free pass. He gets a free pass from the
and perhaps if cancel culture is and perhaps if cancel culture had happened a little bit sooner, we would have been able to take care of that.
We're canceling this segment. We're moving on. All right, Mr. Great conversation on Gina Carano. We're not going to reach agreement on that one, but let's see if we can reach agreement on this one. This is Mr. Potato Head.
Mr. Potato Head.
Mr. Potato Head is getting a gender-neutral rebrand to promote equality and inclusion. The popular toy will now be simply known as Potato Head. Some who are proponents of this change say it's important for kids to be able to create their own characters without the need for gender-specific names. Now, those that Jim would probably call the radical right, I hope he uses the word radical when he talks about conservative, since he used it when he talks about liberal, are saying this is cancel culture gone too far. What do you think, Shayla? What do you think about the toy we all grew up with, Mr. Potato Head, Mrs. Potato Head, now just Potato Head?
I mean, I think it makes a lot of sense because as a child, most of us did a lot of gender swapping with the clothes anyway. So to just make it one ubiquitous toy kind of feels just fun and jovial. I know there's a lot of opinions about how we approach the conversations of gender, the institution of gender. As an academic, one of the things that I'm finding within this adjustment to the idea that we have to look at gender as a spectrum and a lot of these gender norms as things that don't apply to these younger generations is that it's just an evidence of somebody moving forward and looking at the time and seeing how do we adjust our brand to fit the direction that is now how we look at rearing children. All of those things continue to change and adapt. And this is just one more evidence of that. It's not evidence of the entire culture falling under our feet.
Jim, I want to read to you some quotes that were made by those in what I'm going to call the radical right, since you like that word radical. Within minutes of the announcement, right-wing commentators like Eric Erickson and Mark Dice went apoplectic, really, on Twitter. Mark Dice says it's time for Republican states to secede. Jesse Hunt said that the toy is now a member of the liberal cancel culture casualties. What do you think about these right-wing commentators?
Again, they have a right to their own speech. I can only share my opinion. I think it's more of an attack on the American family, the family unit of what makes America great and strong. Kids need to have parents. And certainly, it's evolved on the look and feel and the structure of our families. But to be able to tear down because now you've got Mr. and Mrs. That is an attack that's very dangerous, not only to families, but our children. Who are they going to look up to? I grew up in a household where if I didn't have my mother made me gentle, my father made me a man. If I didn't have both, I would be a little awkward. And I think that's just a right out attack against families. And that's the whole idea of this whole cancel culture. They're going to, who's next? Mr. Rogers, Mr. Kangaroo, who's next?
Maybe they are next, but Jim, your notion of families has to evolve from the 19th century. Families now involve fathers and fathers, mothers and mothers, the family unit. Jim, I let you talk. You got to let other folks talk. The family unit is no longer the unit that you just described. The family unit has evolved. There are lots of single moms. There are lots of single dads. And it doesn't mean that kids can't grow up both learning to be nurturing and learning to be strong. You are attributing certain qualities, characteristics to individuals based on their gender, suggesting that somehow a man can't teach a child to be nurturing or that a woman can't teach a child to be strong. I grew up in a single family female household, and I consider myself incredibly strong. And likewise, I'm incredibly nurturing. So you don't have to have a male figure in the house to be strong. You don't have to have a female figure in the house to be gentle. Shayla, you jump in on this point. What are your notions? What do you think of Jim's?
That's one of the biggest reasons. We talked about this last week. It's one of the biggest challenges we have in the Black community. It's a breakdown. Black people lose the most.
The breakdown in families has nothing to do with Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head. Mr. and Mrs. Potato Head are not representatives.
Jim, you want us to be respectful of you. Be respectful.
I apologize.
Let Shayla.
I don't want to get canceled, so I apologize.
Thank you. Respect Shayla.
In play, children use toys as a proxy for how they start to represent themselves. Mr. and Mr. Potato Head are not proxies for parents. They're proxies for how our children are able to come up with their own sense of identity. And we see so many children who suffer or commit suicide or who end up in horribly traumatic mental situations because they aren't allowed the opportunity to figure out for themselves where they fall on the gender spectrum. And within the Black community, especially, we have so many members of our community who are trans or non-binary and struggle with representation because of the deep-rooted misogyny that we feel that we have to perpetuate as Black people in order to say that we have some kind of a nuclear family. But if we look at ourselves culturally, if we look at actual Africanism, we have always had non-binary representatives in our culture. We have always had the inclusion within Yoruba society. There were no pronouns of male and female. The way we have instituted this westernized interpretation of what a family is supposed to be that doesn't even inherently apply multiculturally. If we look at Indigenous communities, if we look at Indian communities, there are spaces in which there have always been a multitudinous look at what is the gender spectrum. And so this is just catching up to the times. Western Judeo-Christian framework is no longer the only representation of who we are within America. And we will continue to grow. We can sit here and debate forever like that this is the down, that a plastic toy is the downfall of the American family. But the American family has changed. And we need to be able to protect our children by showing them that these representations of who their family looks like, who they look like, are just as valuable as the time that we lived in the last century, in which the nuclear family of a man and a woman and two and a half kids and a dog was the only way that we could achieve any sense of respect for what is parenting or humanity.
And we're moving on, Jim, but just so that you'll know, you can still buy the brand potato and you can still get all of the accessories, and you can have Mr. Potato Head, you can have Mrs. Potato Head, you can have Mr. and Mr., Mrs. and Mrs. You can do whatever you want. So your favorite toy is still intact. So you can feel good about that, Jim. Talking about culture wars, we're going to talk about Donald Trump. You mentioned that somehow culture wars are the province of liberals, of people who maybe consider themselves Democrats, and that's categorically false, as I said at the beginning of the program. Just this morning, Donald Trump issued a statement demanding that Fox News cancel conservative commentator Karl Rove. Karl Rove, as you all know, has been a mainstay in Republican politics for decades. He was a former chief of staff in the Bush administration. Trump calls him a rhino, a Republican in name only. That's what that acronym stands for. And somehow is demanding that he get canceled. And we need look any further when we talk about, Republicans versus liberals or Democrats. The CPAC conference, the conference that was about cancel culture, canceled young Pharaoh, because they didn't like some of the comments he had made about Jews, and they determined that those comments were reprehensible. So, Jim, how can you maintain that cancel culture is somehow, associated with liberal Democrats when you have Donald Trump, the head of the Republican Party, the head of the conservative movement, demanding that a fellow Republican be canceled?
Well, number one, he's entitled as a private citizen to share his opinion, and that's all he did. As a matter of fact, Donald Trump is a victim of cancel culture. He shared his opinion, and he lost his privileges of being able to utilize social media. He's an example of lost opportunity to be able to say what he has and to speak about what he believes. But he's speaking right now as a private citizen. He's sharing his opinion. He's very passionate about, are you with us? Are you against us? And he's entitled to that opinion. Fox News is not going to make a decision based off of one private citizen, nor should the federal government step in or other groups step in to tell Fox News on how they should respond to Donald Trump and any other private citizen that's watching their show.
Yeah, it's curious to me, Shayla, that Jim uses the word opinion. So when it's to his advantage, these are opinions of private citizens. But when we're talking about ridding our society of racist and sexist stereotypes and people that perpetuate those racist and sexist stereotypes, there's somehow cancel culture. And so I want to ask you your opinion about Jim Jordan. He actually asked Congress to hold hearings on what he called the scourge of cancel culture after speaking himself at the CPAC conference that it just canceled young Pharaoh. What are we to make of this hypocrisy? And we know it was the Republicans, Donald Trump, and at the leader of the cancel Colin Kaepernick after he took a knee protesting police brutality against African-American men.
I think when we for one, we have to address the fact that Donald Trump is not just a private citizen. He is the former president of the United States. We're only a few months outside of his tenure. And one of the things, in this matter of kind of art imitating life, one of the things that Donald Trump made one of the biggest proponents of his time as president was bringing in this concept of "you're fired" from his television series. So we saw the ramifications that had for the government when Donald Trump was so quick to cancel a number of the people that he had brought into his cabinet and installed in offices, because the minute that they said something or did something that he didn't agree with, their freedom of speech only extended as long as it didn't hit Donald Trump's nose. And so when we look at something like, if we look at what happened with him being removed from Twitter. A lot of that push had to do with the ways that he was using his freedom of speech in order to incite violence, and the ways that that was starting to cause conflict throughout the country. We see a lot of this usage of a rhetoric that cancel culture is the problem, when a lot of cancel culture started as a Republican base. Like we as, as the other side of the American people, have dealt for a very long time with a number of things that supposedly Republican or, the conservative right, or however you want to look at, that conservatives have deemed inappropriate, that largely have to do with a difference in culture and not a difference in ethics. And we are just at a point where we're trying to hit an equilibrium, where we're actually looking at what it means to abide by an ethics that is really democratic, that really looks at the fact that ethics are going to have to involve the full scope of humanity, and not just a few people who have a few like heteronormative Judeo-Christian high upper class religious opinions. It's going to have to encompass more of what the American population is looking like. We're moving into a time that by the time we get into the 2030s, those people won't even be the physical majority of our country. Our children.
Shayla's talking about inappropriate use of Twitter. Does that include Maxine Waters?
Hold on a second. What Shayla is saying is that, as this country becomes more brown and as this country becomes more diverse, it is that minority that seemingly is having the biggest problem with accepting the evolution of the country. I want to ask you though, Jim, do you think that Jim Jordan's hearing should go forward? He wants to have these hearings on what he calls the scourge of cancel culture?
I think yes, because it's important. I mean, all of this canceling of our culture is impacting mostly our First Amendment, and especially freedom of speech. And when you see you've got major social media companies out there that can selectively choose who they're going to allow to have access to the media and not have access, that we need a good discussion about that. And I think he's right. The Congress needs to talk about that, have investigation. I think there need to be laws to protect our existing freedom of speech. You can't have it to where Donald Trump is accountable, but Maxine Waters can say certain things that can trigger Republicans in being attacked. So everybody's got to be accountable. And that's all I'm saying. And we've got to also take into account that perspectives and views change over time. We don't need to cancel things. Shayla and I are both from Kentucky. My old Kentucky home, the whole beautiful song they sang at the beginning of every Kentucky Derby used to say many years ago, the darkies are happy and gay. They didn't cancel my old Kentucky home song. They changed it. I'm for mend it, don't end it, and make things better.
I'm glad they got rid of that phrase darkies. Yes. How offensive to begin with.
Exactly.
Jim,
mend it, don't end it.
Jim, Jim, let's be clear about the First Amendment, because you're using that a lot. And I want people to be very clear. Yes, there is something in the Constitution called the First Amendment, freedom of speech, but it has limits. It has limits. And particularly in so many of the contexts that we're talking about, individuals' First Amendment rights are abridged all the time. We agreed to limit our First Amendment rights. As Shayla said at the beginning, when you take a contract with a company, when you go on a job, you may have a First Amendment right, but as an employer, I have the right to dictate in many ways what your speech is. That's what the contract, that's what the money I pay you allows you to do. The First Amendment also has their limits on it in terms of hate speech. You're not allowed to spew speech that is considered hate speech, according to a whole body of constitutional law. So there is the First Amendment out there, but there are limits to that First Amendment right, and we don't all get to go around and shout fire in the middle of a crowded theater. You don't have the First Amendment right to do that. So there are some limitations to your First Amendment right. Let's move on. Let's talk about Dr.
I'd like to jump in.
To let you guys go.
Yeah, I'd like to jump in really quickly.
I got to move on.
You just mentioned the idea that freedom of speech has never been unilateral, and one of the things that we don't talk about enough is the reason why this is becoming such a big issue is because we're seeing what happens when people that we always thought were going to be in minority, people that we always thought were going to be silenced, gain power. And the real thing that people are contesting is the fact that power has repercussions. And it is causing people to have to deal with the accountability of what they say. Freedom of speech in a lot of ways hasn't changed. You are free to say whatever it is that you want to. But the issue is you will be accountable for the ways that what you choose to say affects the nation. And that is always the way.
We're talking about, let's talk about accountability.
It's fair across the board, Shayla. I'm for that if it's fair across the board. It certainly is not, though. You know that.
It's never been fair across the board.
We're moving to Dr. Seuss because we're talking about accountability. And Dr. Seuss, the enterprise, announced that 6 books penned by the children's book author will no longer be published because of hurtful and wrongful characters of color who have been portrayed in these books. Now we're talking about accountability. This is the Dr. Seuss's enterprise, his own company deciding, not libraries, not bookstores, not, others, third parties making this decision. Ironically, though, as this decision has been made, Dr. Seuss books have been soaring to the top of Amazon's bestsellers list. They've been selling like hotcakes. You can go on eBay now. You may have to pay $4,000 or $5,000 for one of these books that has been, discontinued by the enterprise. Do you think this was the right decision, Shayla, by the Dr. Seuss enterprise?
It was a forward-thinking decision. I mean, the amount of the catalog that they're pulling is pretty minuscule. 6 books that have some rather inappropriate for our particular time images of how they display BIPOC culture. And the fact that it's also, in talking about appropriate or inappropriate, it was a choice of the actual estate. It was a choice made in representation of what Dr. Seuss stood for, and understanding as time progresses that there are certain parts of his legacy that they want to uphold, and other parts of his legacy that they feel will no longer serve us as a community. And so it's a way of also instilling more of the things that Dr. Seuss was trying to accomplish by creating his children's books, by preventing more obstacles for certain children, or for really children writ large, because the idea that it doesn't hurt it only hurts specific children to see negative representations in books is rather farcical. So I am a proponent of yes, removing those 6 books from the catalog so that we can better enjoy the rest of what Dr. Seuss has offered, so that we can better enjoy the amazing span of what is now children's literature, how much it has evolved since the time of something like The Cat in the Hat or Green Eggs and Ham. We're in a really beautiful time when it comes to books. And it, I think, is a move that they made, and also a celebration of the ways that children's literature has advanced and trying to keep in touch with the times.
All right, Jim, are you missing those 6 books? You feel like
I am.
The world has lost something because of those 6 books?
I grew up with those books. Those books are me. They're classics. The writing in those books are incredible. I know parents out there want their children to experience those stories, but on this one, I do think that there's an opportunity for mending, not ending, but certainly mending. When you have Africans who are portrayed and Asians who are portrayed, like in one of the books, If I Ran the Zoo, I think some of the illustrations in today's time are inappropriate. And would I say that you should cancel the book? I don't think you should cancel the book. You just make it better. Coke didn't get rid of Coke. They just came up with new Coke. So there are ways in this day and time for us to make these books better versus just saying, you know what, it's terrible. They were written at a certain time. Make them current, but don't get rid of the classic nature behind the story.
Yeah, Jim, I just heard something that's music to my ears. And Shayla, I don't know if you heard it. I know my viewers heard it, but I think we got agreement.
Yes, we can.
If I had a bell, I would be bringing it. So on that note,
each other's opinions.
I knew, Shayla, if we just
Jim, you also know those books are the B-sides. You're not paying that much attention to
Shayla grew up with those books. She loves those. She's from Kentucky like me. You know good and well you love those books.
Not if I like the zoo. I'm good. But anyway,
Shayla, I knew if you and I tried, if we stayed on Jim long enough, we would get to agreement. We got to agreement. And on that note, I've got to let you guys go. I got some but Jim, I just want to say thank the Lord. You were listening to 2 women this morning, one from Kentucky and one from St. Louis, and we got Jim to say something that's not appropriate.
That you
So
agree
Shayla,
with,
we should
that you
feel
agree
good
with.
about ourselves. We didn't
I
have to
definitely
cancel Jim. We
And
didn't
we
have to
didn't cancel
cancel
each
Jim. We
other.
just have to
Jim, you can
amend
stay.
Jim, as he said.
Areva, your show is on fire because we're not canceling each other. And
Yeah.
that's what we all need to do. Respect each other's opinions.
All right, but thank you so much, Jim. Thank you, Shay.
Thank
Always
you.
fun to see you guys.
Absolutely.
It was
Cancel
lovely.
culture, whether you love it or you hate it, is here to stay. Proliferation of social media sites just make it easy to hashtag and get rid of somebody. And some of these folks need to go. Sorry, Jim. Some of these people are not mendable, as you would say. Some of them are complete disasters. So thank God for hashtags. Good to see you guys. Have a great weekend.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All
Take
right,
care,
we're going to
Shayla.
keep talking about
Take care.
Dr. Seuss because it is a big, big topic, and so many kids grew up reading those books, and they still read them today. My next guest is illustrator. She's an award-winning illustrator. She's a designer. She's a toy maker herself, and she is the author of the book, Me and Mama. She just won a 2021 Coretta Scott King Award and a Caldecott Medal of Honor for her book. She is none other than Cozbi Cabrera. She's been on the show before, and I'm so happy to welcome her back on this topic. And also joining me is Deborah Caldwell Stone. She's a lawyer, and she's also the director of the American Library Association. So these are the two people that I wanted to hear from on this whole Dr. Seuss controversy. Good morning, Cozbi. Good morning, Deborah.
Good morning.
Okay, so you heard my other guest, Jim, said these books are classics. He did say that, there some language, some imagery is inappropriate. Maybe we should mend them. I don't think that's possible. Deborah, is it possible to go back and rewrite any of these Dr. Seuss books?
Well, it's always possible, but that's the choice of the author. And we have to remember that that's what happened here, that the Seuss estate evaluated these books in good faith and made a decision that they did not want to perpetuate these offensive, harmful racial stereotypes in the book. And so they've withdrawn them, as is their right. And, we'll move forward. There's such a rich wealth of books out there right now for kids. The children's publishing industry is doing such a great job in pulling out books like Cozbi's. We're seeing so many great books reflecting the diversity of society, the diversity of experiences. And it's our job as librarians to make sure that we surface and elevate those new voices in the library. They really can see themselves reflected in in the library when they come there to borrow books.
Some pundits and politicians have said that pulling those books is akin to book burning. You push back on that, Deborah. I read in a post where you said that that's absolutely false and that's, hyperbole. But who does make the decision about which books, should be on library shelves, for example? I know in this case, you're saying it's the Dr. Seuss Enterprise. It's his estate. It's not libraries across the country saying pull the books. But are there ever decisions made by your association, where books are taken off the shelves?
Well, I want to make a correction. Our association doesn't make the decision about what books are on the shelves. We recognize, celebrate authors, and recommend books to libraries. But libraries are all local institutions. Your local library board hires a library director, library staff, and they're the ones who make decisions about what books are on the shelf according to written collection development policies. And so we promote access to information. Libraries collect a diverse range of materials from all parts of the political spectrum because they have to serve everyone in the community. And so ultimately it's the staff of the library who will make the decision in light of the community's needs. Now, that said, librarians have recognized that we have a long way to go to address this issue of a lack of diversity in children's literature. And so they're making a great effort to lift up and celebrate diverse voices, to create programming for them, to make sure that they're in the hands of kids, to recommend them, and they're adding them to the collection. It doesn't mean that these books that some people see as treasured classics for their family are going to go away. The decision by Dr. Seuss Enterprises isn't the reason to remove these books from the shelf. Although some libraries may critically evaluate these books and make decisions about whether or not they're in a historical collection, or if they're not circulating and not popular, just taking them off the shelf altogether. But ultimately, what we want to do as libraries is to increase the diversity of voices in the library. Make sure that when kids come to the library, they see themselves and their families reflected in the.
I want to get you to jump into this, Cosby. You've written award-winning children's books that showcase diversity. You talk about hair. So I have like this super curly hair today. So you've written books about Black, girls and their hair, and you have tried to, through your books, show the diversity, particularly of African Americans. What do you think of Dr. Seuss and the controversy?
Yeah, I think that so many people feel just sort of hot, regarding the topic of Dr. Seuss, because the truth is Dr. Seuss is a very well-beloved brand. It's like the nostalgia, this idea that you might have been introduced to him while you were seated on somebody's lap. And so there's a warm, sort of fuzzy feeling. And the notion that now that we should examine or possibly even reevaluate, sort of like where some of the books are, a lot of people feel like they get sort of emotional about it and even defensive. But the truth of the matter is, like, every society, every civilization has cause to recalibrate, and think about the Catholic Church. It's like they had to recalibrate and sort of make an assessment as to what is good and what needs to be extracted. And I think that's just a very healthy practice for all of us to do in our lives and, and just society as a whole. And so, yeah, representation does matter. And there is now sort of, we're at this inflection point where we have own voices, who say, this is devaluing or this is dehumanizing. And the fact that we sort of like have cause to pause, to listen, to reevaluate and see, like, what is it that we can construct, particularly when we're talking about our children. There's not a child that doesn't say that they don't want for a better world,
Absolutely.
And that requires-
I guess I'm a little. So as we're researching the show this morning, yesterday, and last couple of days, we learned a lot about Dr. Seuss, and it's not too pretty. I mean, he was born in the 20s. He wrote a lot of his books in the late 30s and 40s. Researchers have found that his books have many, many, many images portraying negative images of Asian culture, African American culture. Some would say he was just pretty much a flaming racist. And I hear what you're saying, Cosby, about the brand. The Seuss brand is so beloved, and kids grow up, falling in love with the books. Parents, I have 3 kids. I probably have a whole, bookshelf full of Dr. Seuss's books. But even The Cat in the Hat, is under review, is under scrutiny. So how do we, Deborah, separate the brand in this case from the man? Because if we look at the man, Theodore is not looking too good to me right now. I'm not feeling all warm and cozy about Theodore the man.
No, we're finding out, as you say, we're finding out so much about Theodore Geisel as a person, his background. But, the books themselves, some of them become, as we've talked about, treasured classics, and some are inoffensive. Hop on Pop, for example, was my daughter's favorite. Now it's been decades. She's now a grown adult. But there's a simple rhyming book that kids love. But there are other books I chose not to give her. And that's really where we're at here, is taking a critical look at these books and what content they have. We now understand far better that kids learn about race at a very young age, and that illustrations like the ones that are in, I think I saw it on Mulberry Street, or the other 5 books, can actually have a real impact on how kids perceive race and race relations in society. So it's incumbent upon us as adults to reevaluate as time goes on. We've all, society changes, people changes. It's unfortunate that, Seuss, Dr. Seuss reflects the culture of his time, the racism and backwards views of his time. But we can move on from that. And for those people who feel a need to keep the book on the shelf, well, it's there. Well, not for these 5 books because they're going to go out of print. But it's the author's prerogative to whether or not, or in this case, the estate's prerogative, whether or not they want these books out there. And they've actually recognized the harm that these images do, and they've made a choice, and they've promised to go on and do that. And so I think we're just seeing an inflection point in society, an opportunity to look at these books and remember to really critically think about what they reflect and to engage in important conversations. We've seen. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, finish your thought.
No, but we find that often putting these books in context start great conversations that parents are sitting down, and when they get to these illustrations, they have important conversations with their kids about racial stereotyping, racial prejudice, so that the kids have a better understanding when they move on from these books about the harm that the harmful images that these books have, these portrayals, and a better understanding about how to engage in the world and how to treat people.
Yeah, it's Dr. Seuss obviously is the topic of this controversy, but Laura Ingalls Wilder's portrayal of Native Americans in her, super popular books on, Little House on the Prairie, those novels too. And we know wasn't it the American Library Association that removed Laura's name in 2018 from a Lifetime Achievement Award for most distinguished books?
Well, a division of ALA, which is the Association of Library Services to Children, actually sponsors that award, which is a Lifetime Achievement Award for children's literature. And over time, looking at the stereotypes that Laura Ingalls Wilder used to portray Native Americans, Indigenous people, they finally felt that it was inconsistent with what they were wanting to promote and recognize with the awards. So they've moved on. And again, it's not saying that everybody has to stop reading the books or libraries should take the books out of the collections, but we're strongly encouraging everyone to have a critical look at the books. And when they engage with the books, critically engage, have conversations with the kids and to make sure that the books are placed in context and that they understand that these are outdated stereotypes that don't reflect reality and that there's better ways to portray the
diverse
people
populations, obviously. But Cozbi, again, it's Laura Ingalls Wilder, it's Dr. Seuss, it's a whole slew of Disney movies. We were looking at the Muppets, negative stereotypes in the Muppets, the Dumbo character, the Aristocats. I mean, the list is pretty long when we think about, again, these brands that our kids have come to love, to adore as parents, that we buy into. We buy the books, we buy the merchandise, we purchase the movies, we, take our kids to the movies. And when we step back and reflect on a lot of these brands, some of these images are just awful.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I think the fact that we can acknowledge that they're awful shows that there's been tremendous growth, simply because every society has to evolve, and how we reflect our society also evolves over time. So the fact that we can even look at these with a more critical and examining eye is an indication that we have grown. And so I think that's actually it's a good thing. I say save it for the archives. Let's be really deliberate about what it is that we are in fact offering our children. If we say that we want this better world, we know that it starts really early. It's I remember my daughter going into her kindergarten, me dropping her off in the cafeteria, and they had these worksheets of, it was all princess hair, cascading hair, and she had to sit and color that in to occupy the time. And then I remember her going into the classroom and then being sent to the principal's office because she was in fact fingering a child's long hair. And I thought, morning after morning after morning, here she was confronted with these coloring sheets. I mean, it's going to have an effect.
Impact,
It's everything really does count, and we can't pretend that it doesn't.
So do you think though, Cozbi, given what you've written as an author, given that experience you just said with your daughter, which is probably typical for so many classrooms across this country, do you think schools have a different obligation, say, than a public library? Do you think schools should be taking a different approach when it comes to some of these books that have these racist stereotypes? Should they be, removed from the curriculum? Should your daughter be forced to sit there and color in, yellow hair on a white princess, and that image being, really imparted to her that white people are beautiful, they have long flowing hair, and they live in castles?
Honestly, I don't think this is an either or. I think that when we pretend that there isn't a balance and that it hasn't been skewed, I think that's where we enter into the sort of like this difficult zone. I think of, there are in fact some children that resemble flaxen-haired maidens in the world, but the point is that there are children that look quite different. And so it's not to the exclusion of one, ignoring the other. And that's where we create this sort of imbalance and upset, and that we wind up causing tremendous damage to the psyche and to this notion of self-concept. And self-concept, we know that if you destroy it, or even if you think you're being benign by erasure, you destroy it, it actually has implications for generations. And all you have to do is like sit back and watch it sort of like play itself out. So I think it is incumbent upon educators to be deliberate about what they're presenting as nourishment and exposure to our children.
Deborah, I know I said earlier that the Cat in the Hat is under consideration, and we know that the Seuss Enterprise said they consulted with experts and educators to make the decision about the 6. Do you anticipate any other books in the large catalog being discontinued?
Honestly, I think that they took a very deliberate look at what was in the catalog, and those were sort of decided to be discontinued, not canceled. And
Right.
There is a larger body of the catalog. And I think that there's really kind of even no need to sort of like begin to continue to do a plucking. I think that it's now, there's an awareness. And so readers will have the opportunity to kind of draw their own conclusions, which is what we want people to do, right? We don't want to necessarily think for people, but it's nice to sort of shine a light
Right.
to stimulate awareness, and then let people sort of like use their discernment and color in as they see fit.
Right. What do you think, Deborah? Do you think any other books will be pulled from the catalog by the Dr. Seuss Enterprise?
I can't predict that. I can tell you what I think, and I know is happening in libraries, frankly, which is that librarians are acutely aware of the impacts of race and bias on children's perceptions. And so they're working very hard to diversify the collections and to elevate books like Cozbi's so that they're in the hands of children all across the country. We really take this responsibility very seriously. And it goes to your question about whether educators have a responsibility. Well, librarians feel they have that responsibility too. And so while they understand that there is an intellectual freedom issue with keeping books on the shelf, on the other hand, that doesn't prevent librarians from recognizing what's going on in the world and making sure that there's cultural representation in the collection so that every child can find themselves there. Every family can see themselves reflected there. And it's very important work.
You raised a good point, Deborah, and I misspoke at the top of your segment, suggesting that somehow your association made the decisions about what goes into, community libraries. And you said, no, that's based on the community itself and that local library, whether it's a commission or, group of people that come together. But suppose the kids are living in, some of these states that are not as evolved as other states, and they're living in communities that are not as evolved, and the leadership is making decisions about, what books go on the shelves. Do parents have any ability to impact what is presented to their kids in their libraries if they're not on one of these, kind of fancy commissions?
Well, they do. Most libraries, collection development policies allow for popular choice. You go to the library and you ask for these books in the children's collection and the adults' collections. You ask for them to buy them. You ask for them to, even if they have to borrow them. But libraries are, particularly local libraries, are acutely sensitive to the needs of the community, and they build that into their collection development policies. And so I encourage any parent to go there. The other place to go is to be a loud voice at your public library board meetings and to be aware of who's being elected or appointed to your public library board. It's as much a political thing as anything else. If you know who's on your board and that person is willing to represent your interest, to address these issues head on, and to make sure that library staff is empowered to make sure that the collection reflects the diversity of persons and voices in the community, then you can really make a change at your local library. And we really, it's really something anyone can do. Any parent, any individual in the community can do is to go to their library to make sure that that the collection reflects their experience and that those books are there available for kids and adults alike to look at.
Well, finally, a final question for you, Cozbi. How can we, as a society, how can we at the Special Report elevate authors like you, children book authors who are writing books that, reflect the diversity of our, of our world, of our community? How do we help more authors like you get published and get their books into the hands of kids around this country?
I think it always sort of comes down to the dollars and the cents in terms of the interest and the book sales. It's to buy a book. It's to gift a book. And when the publishers begin to see that this is in fact sort of like the money and the talker one, is when they feel sort of compelled, because everything sort of almost like comes back down to the marketplace. The marketplace shows interest. Then there is in fact an incentive to enlarge and to expand.
Yeah, well, I'm so glad you brought that up, because what we've seen with Dr. Seuss, I read a report that his annual income from the books has skyrocketed from about $9 million to like $33 million. And he's on one of these Forbes lists. So there's renewed interest in his books, and people are driving the prices up, incredibly for the 6 books that have been pulled. Thank you so much, Cozbi. Thank you, Deborah, for joining this conversation. We're going to keep talking about this, because obviously this impacts the lives of millions and millions of children and families across the country. A lot of people are, going to probably start pulling every book they have off their bookshelf to figure out, did I just buy into the brand because I was told that this is the right brand, or does this brand and this author really reflect the kind of images, use the kind of words and terms that, reflect my view as a parent and hopefully our view as a country. So really great conversation with both of you ladies. And thank you for joining me this morning.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
All right. I want to thank everyone for joining me. Such an important conversation. Even if you don't have kids, of course, you know who Dr. Seuss is. Of course, you know who Mr. or now Potato Head is. And you've heard the term cancel culture, because it's everywhere. And contrary to Mr. Coleman, this is not a liberal concept. Everyone is being held accountable now, and we all have more ways than ever to hold people accountable. And it's nothing wrong with, calling people out for their racist, for their sexist, for their misogynistic conduct, behavior, and words. And if you are lucky enough, like, Gina, the actress, to get a part in a major movie, or to be a part of a major series, or to have a contract with any company to do anything, trust me, you're going to have to conduct yourself in a way that's consistent with the values of that company. And if you think that somehow is abridging or restricting your First Amendment rights, then you shouldn't sign the contract. But if you sign your name on the dotted line, that means your social media, that means your interactions in public, that means everything that you do that could reflect negatively on that company has a say in it. And if you don't like it, then don't take the check. All right, y'all, some words to live by before I get out. I am broadcasting this morning from my hometown. So a big shout out to everyone in St. Louis that's been watching today. I love you. I'm so glad to be back home. I'm in the beautiful office of my aunt, who I'm here visiting and doing a little business while I'm here as well. But I just wanted to let you know, in case you're wondering, where is Areva today? Because this doesn't look like our normal studio. I'm not. I'm at home. And since I am at home, these are my words to live by. Middle fingers up. Put them hands high, wave it in his face, tell him, boy, bye. That's the Queen. Yes, dropping some knowledge in her uber popular song, Sorry. B ain't sorry, and neither am I. As a mother of 3, aunt to more than 24 kids, and leader of a nonprofit that serves millions of kids each year, the books we share with our children matter. Books shape their worldview and tell them how to relate to people, places, and ideas around them. And as grown-ups, we have a responsibility to ensure that the view we share for them, that view is devoid of racist and sexist stereotypes. And if that means that some rich dude that will have to make less than $33 million, and if that means that rich dude falls off the Forbes millionaire list, oh well, sorry. Okay, I'm out, y'all. Don't forget to wear your mask. Don't forget to be safe out there. And don't forget, we are all in this together.